Only mode.
Hello, I'm Ernie Humphrey, the CEO of FP&A Webinars. I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us for our webinar today, The Art of Scenario Planning, Impacting Decisions, and Delivering Business Agility. I would like to thank our webinar partner today, Senage, a world leader in automated budgeting and planning software solutions for small to medium-sized organizations, whose strong commitment to thought leadership helps make this webinar possible today. As we enter into the heart of the budgeting and strategic planning season, it is the time to ensure that your 2019 budgeting and planning programs do not serve as strategic anchors, limiting your company's ability to anticipate, respond, and react effectively to market dynamics. Today, we will explore rolling forecast best practices, different ways scenarios can be considered when developing contingency plans, and allocating resources to be ready for uncertainty in today's world, and how to leverage technology in a dynamic planning environment to prepare for uncertainty and capitalize on market dynamics that create strategic opportunities for your company. Before I delve into the content, I'm going to offer a few quick words about FP&A webinars, cover a few housekeeping items, and then review our learning objectives for the webinar. FP&A Webinars offers webinars designed to empower FP&A success at companies of all sizes across all industries. We only do what we do best, which is webinars. Now for the exciting housekeeping items. For those of you interested in CTP or FP&A credits, you'll have to answer all of our polling questions today and remain on for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions regarding CTP or FP&A credit, please send me an email to Ernie@360thoughtleadership.com. Again, that's Ernie@360thoughtleadership.com. I'd like to hear from you today, so you can ask questions at any time in the Q&A area of your GoToWebinar control panel. I will do my best to get to everyone's questions at the tail end of the webinar as we have time for the Q&A session. Fear not, if I do not get to your question, I will follow up with you directly after the webinar. Finally, we appreciate your consideration in taking a short survey at the end of the webinar today, as we always strive to improve the ROI we offer our event attendees for their valuable time. Now, the learning objectives, our value proposition to you for spending an hour of your valuable time with us today. After the webinar, I'd like you to be able to understand the foundations of effective scenario planning, understand the strategic value of scenario planning for your companies, and identify specific opportunities to increase the strategic value of the FP&A function at your company. So what is our roadmap to accomplish our learning objectives for today? Well, we're going to talk about some challenges in budgeting and planning and best practices and techniques in continuous planning, because in my mind, continuous planning is a condition that is necessary to have effective scenario planning. Then we'll get into scenario planning, which I view as the foundation of business agility. As we talked about in the introductory comments, it's very important for companies to be able to react and respond in today's world. And then we'll talk about some inherent barriers to scenario planning and how you might be able to remove those. And then we'll talk about collaboration, which I believe is the foundation of effective scenario planning. So we'll take a few minutes to discuss business partnering and how you can make that happen at your organization. But I really think collaboration is really the key to effective scenario planning. So you really want to involve your company leaders and your business leaders as you're having these conversations in creating your scenarios and understanding the drivers and, most importantly, the leading indicators of those drivers. And then we'll take some time to examine a leading technology solution and that empowers scenario planning. And I really think that this technology is the engine of business agility. So we'll run through really quickly just some screenshots, a really quick example of that. And after the webinar is over, you'll have the opportunity to request if you'd like to learn more about the topic and or the technology we'll be briefly discussing today. And then I'll offer a few closing thoughts, key takeaways, and then as time permits, we will have our Q&A session at the end of our webinar today. So I like to set the stage. Those of you who have been on more than one of my webcasts know I like to keep it simple, but sometimes I think there's confusion at companies So I like to start with, budget, plan, forecast. A budget is what you would like to happen, and of course we're probably all going through that right now. A plan is how you're going to make it happen, and then that forecast is what you think is going to happen. And what we'll talk about in scenario planning is in this continuous environment, these different scenarios allow us to forecast what we think is going to happen and then adjust that into our plan, how we're going to make it happen. So if scenario A happens, I forecast this. How do I plan to react? And what do I change? What decisions do I change? What drivers do I impact that are going to drive company performance? So again, it's just the three terms. I think they're often used the same, and I think there needs to be some clarity there. So budget, plan, and forecast. So I like to talk about the inherent barriers to success, because anytime I couch best practice, what I like to do is couch it as, first of all, as a company, you need to know where you are, and then you need to know where you want to go, and then we determine how we're going to get there. And a lot of times, what it takes to get there, that challenge that you have can significantly be mitigated if you remove some inherent barriers to success that exist at your company. Now, it's not always the case that it's free to do these things, but oftentimes there are actions that you can take which are extremely cost effective that can really help you achieve your objectives. So I like to say sometimes when you do that initial assessment on where you want to go, looks like you're climbing Mount Everest, but then when you start to pick at the inherent barriers, get the right people involved, remove obstacles, then that mountain becomes not quite as high. And what we'll see, especially in scenario planning, is that with the right technology, it's really, really not that far to the top of that mountain to really empower a business agility, which I believe fuels competitive advantage in any industry. So and I like to couch things in people, process, and technology. So people, do you have the right people involved in the budgeting process and the budgeting and planning process? And then you have to ask yourself these questions. Do they care? Do they have the proper incentives to care? So people that are going to impact the quality of your budgeting and planning, do they care? A lot of times we need to give them incentives to care, and sometimes that's a conversation. A lot of times it's really driven by the involvement. So just show them that you value their input, what their input means to the company, and then also it often helps to show what's the impact going to be if we don't get the correct information, right, from the business leader. So show them the impact of, let's say, padding forecast or sandbagging. And sometimes companies actually have incentives, compensation incentives of how accurately the business unit forecast rolls up. So there are ways to do that. And the other thing is to make sure that the people involved have the resources and support they need to add value. So you want to make sure that your processes are consistent. And so we're looking apples to apples. We'll talk about this in the technology perspective. We want to make sure that everyone has adequate visibility and access to effectively communicate in real time is obviously the best case scenario. And then you want to specifically ask your people, do you have what you need in order to support what we're asking of you? So that's seems pretty simple, but it really helps that buy-in. So you say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. Look at the systems. Hopefully you have that one system, one version of the truth. And so you can all go log on the same systems and communicate, but we need to have that conversation. And then I touched on the process, right? Are the processes well defined? Is it consistent across departments and across borders? So we know there's difficulties there, but what I found is that technology can really help mitigate some of these issues in consistency just by our ability to effectively communicate, have meetings live. So all those things are important. And then you got to have a process that's flexible enough to allow continuous improvement. So that is part of the continuous planning process. There has to be some flexibility. We'll talk about those scenario plans, but we're going to try and really understand the things that can possibly happen. But if we have that black swan event, we have to make sure that we have the ability to react to that as well as possible be able to communicate that right across all of our consistent stakeholders, be able to, pick up the phone, send a message. We got to get everyone on the phone or in that meeting right away and see what we're going to do to effectively respond. But in some cases, those events can actually be beneficial depending on where you're at in your industry. And then from the technology perspective, you got to look at what systems are being leveraged and why. Do we need a whole bunch of systems? Do we have too many systems? Do we have legacy systems that we can get away from? So in terms of scenario planning, it might be that we have several ERPs, but then we have our budgeting and planning cloud-based solution, which is often the case. So let's take a look at all those ERP systems. Is there some way that we can standardize that? Can we get everyone on the same ERP system, and that will help us in our FP&A technology and getting the ROI from that as well. It's very important to have systems integrability, so all the systems that need to be communicating in order to allow us to plan and do that scenario planning. Is it our ERP systems? Do they talk well with each other? Our HRIS systems, our CRM system, customer relationship management. So we want to make sure that we have integrability of systems. Can they talk to each other? Can they talk to each other in real time? Can we get the information that we need in a timely manner? And also, can we share that information in the format which people need to see that? And then, does your system facilitate one version of the truth? Here's a point that I'll make many times. Do your systems facilitate collaboration? To me, it's amazing the collaboration that can go on in a lot of the systems today. A lot of the systems have real-time chatter. And then if there's a message for you in the system, it sends you an email. So it's really that real-time communication. And also take a step back when I said the visibility is really key. So do the people that are impacting your budgeting and planning success, do they have the visibility that they need? I'm more of a fan of being open, and I was fortunate at the companies that I was with. The CEO wasn't necessarily trying to hide our strategic plans, and I don't think it works well to hide the strategic plans from your key business leaders and company leaders across the enterprise. I think the more they know, the more that they can make sure that what they're doing is aligning with those objectives. And then, of course, we have to make sure that the systems can handle the data needed, and do we have the functionality? And it's really important when we get to scenario planning and on the functionality side, and I'll share a few survey results around that. So to me, I was shocked in a survey that I was involved in, Global FP&A, Trends in Technology survey, where over 300 companies across the globe were surveyed, and I believe only, I think it's less than 10% of them said they were able to do scenario planning easily. So that's really key, and that's a huge inherent barrier to effective continuous planning. So what is continuous planning? I love this definition from Rob Kugel at Ventana Research. I've had the opportunity to have Rob speak for me in the past a lot, and he's a fantastic speaker, and they have great content on their website as well. Continuous planning uses technology to enable rapid planning and review cycles to support a more agile organization. Put this in what I call Ernie speak. Continuous planning uses technology to enable scenario planning and review cycles to empower business agility. And so what does that mean? Of course, it's an alternative to static budget. So the budget is obviously can be an important tool, but we don't want to have that be a strategic anchor that we have that's limiting our ability to react to market conditions. Involves best practice continuous planning, involves rolling forecast and driver-based planning. So we will touch in each of those areas before we make our journey into specifically discussing scenario planning. But again, I think this is important because I think you have to have this type of environment in order to empower that scenario planning. And so there's obviously different levels of degree of what people think by scenario planning. And so in order to maximize the possibilities that we have with the technology that we have, it's really important that we have that continuous planning environment. Otherwise, we can come up with all these great reactions, to scenarios. So we'll say, "Ooh, scenario B happened. Well, we should do this." Well, that's not really possible because this is the way we're doing things according to our budget, and we can't really change anything. So that's very important. So I'm going to go ahead and ask our first polling question. just to get a sense of how long we might spend on a rolling forecast and some basics there. So just asking you to share with us if your company has adopted rolling forecast. A couple different options, well established, maybe you're still in the process, no, but you're considering, you have no plans, or you might not be sure given your role in the organization. I want to remind everyone who's interested in CTP or FP&A credits that you'll need to answer all of our polling questions today. Of course, I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions here today. So in order to be mindful of our time, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to close the polling question in a few seconds. Then we're going to take a quick look at the results and then just see where we're at in terms of the responses that we get and see if there's any insights or thoughts I had to compare with the research that I've done myself or the research that I'm seeing in the marketplace. So I'm going to go ahead and close the polling question, and I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So I'm glad to see that 33% of you are yes, well established. So if I look at the well established and in the process, 50%, I think that is pretty consistent. Obviously, when we're talking about whether we're using a rolling forecast, obviously the follow-up question is this effective? How has this improved your strategic decision making? And then what can we do, right, in terms of best practices to make our efforts in this arena more valuable to the company? And then we've got 21% are considering and 14% no plans and 14% not sure. So for those 50% of you that are not there yet, I would encourage you to look at how this process works, what it would take. I think it's really key to that business agility that we talked about. And we'll talk about all the different aspects of how markets are changing across the board, regardless of your industry. But I think with the technology being as affordable as it is at this point, I think it's something to take a look at in terms of enabling that rolling forecast and getting out of that static environment. So thank you very much, everyone, for answering our polling question. We're going to talk about what a rolling forecast is and then some best practices, courtesy of some of the content from our strategic partners, FP&A Trends. So if you've never been to the FP&A Trends website, they have great content. Just across the board, they run the international FP&A boards. There's a lot of awesome content. And Larissa Melnichuk is a fabulous resource for FP&A thought leadership. So I encourage you to check that out. So again, just real quickly, you know what that rolling forecast is. You start with your first review, and then you put in the actuals, and then you roll out that forecast 4 quarters, just an example. And then as the actuals come in, we plug in the actuals and we forecast out an additional period. So benefits of rolling forecast, just real quickly, is this maybe part of your business case, right, to look at rolling forecast? But normally when you invest in technology, it's not only that you can do a rolling forecast, you can do scenario planning, and improve decision making, so that business case is a lot more dense than we'll do here. But it gives you more accuracy, flexibility. It allows you to make decisions more quickly, and I believe it allows you to respond effectively, right? But you have to be able to respond. So if your forecast goes up or goes down, and you're giving someone information and they are handcuffed by a strategic anchor such as the budget, it's really not the value. The value is if these decisions are actually made. So if I'm giving you a bunch of information and you're not using it to impact decisions, then there's really no value there, and it's just a cost. So it's really a waste of resources. So I think that's something that we all need to look at. So we're investing, right, in these technologies. So let's take a look, right, where we're at, where we are, what are the impacts, how do we quantify that, and I also believe that in involving folks across the enterprise, it improves the vision, it improves the alignment of the corporate strategy. So when we see CFO surveys, we continue to see a big challenge, I would say, as alignment of the corporate vision across the enterprise. So just some success factors again, courtesy of FP&A Trends. I think this is just a good diagram to print out for everyone, right? Whether you're already there, you're well established, you're in the process of implementing, or you're considering this. So it's always good to take a look, benchmark, and say, okay, now let's assess where we're at, right? So where we're at, where we want to be. So people, so the culture. So sometimes this will consist of a culture change to get out of that dynamic, that static environment. So sometimes we need to have that. We need to have that executive support from the top, but we have to. So in some cases, have some conversations in the culture. Instead of looking back, we need to learn how to look forward. But then we have to really sell the advantages to change. So in some companies, there's a resistance to change. So we need to be mindful of that. And we need to be mindful of any company leaders that have this and really go with them directly. I would highly suggest one-on-one meetings for that. And then the people, obviously, you want to have the right people involved with the right skills. So you may need to look at the skills and mitigate any skills gaps you might have, especially on the analytical side. We talked about you want to have the systems, talked about the processes. You want to have the processes in line. We'll talk about design in a few moments. You want to have a level of integration, so you want to make sure that all the pieces fit together. And then you want to have that participation. We certainly don't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen, right? But we want to have the right cooks in the kitchen. So they have to have the recipe. So I look at the person at the very top who owns everything. They are the chef, and everyone is kind of telling them, okay, these are the ingredients that need to go in. And so a lot of times there are people at the lower levels that they really know what the ingredients add. This is how the ingredients adds to the recipe, right? And I think that is extremely important. And so some of those people, they have great intuition. And one of the things that we want to do in effective budgeting and planning is we don't want to turn off their intuition. We just want to teach them how to validate that intuition with data and fine tune that. So in terms of design, I like this content from Maersk that was on a earlier webinar of ours. But I just think these are 4 things that you look at in the design just to keep in mind. And then if you have that process in place, you just go back and take a look at the slide, think about it, maybe have a meeting and say, visibility. Are we forward looking? We want to have agility. Right? We want to know what's going to happen, leading indicators. Can we correct? How do we correct? We want to have control. And then, of course, if possible, we want to have some level of simplicity, however that is. So we don't want to get people involved in doing some sort of analysis, which is not adding to the value of our forecast. So maybe we have an analytical guru, and then that person communicates any of the analysis being done and the impacts to those people that have that interest. So that's just some, I think the rolling forecast, it really sets the stage. It's a component of continuous planning per the quote that I shared with you earlier. And then when we talk about driver-based planning, I know we talked about this throughout the year, but I think it's really important that companies understand what is driving their business and then really look to incentivize actions that impact these drivers, which impact our company value. And I think this driver-based planning is what impacts our decision. So at the end of the day, for FP&A, a really important outcome is to be impacting decisions, making better decisions. So if we are not impacting decisions, then we need to take a look in the mirror and, okay, what are the inherent barriers? What are we doing wrong? What information do our company leaders need to make better decisions? Again, those are best had with conversations. And it seems like it's simple, but it goes a long way. I've done it. Sit down with your company leaders, if you're accounting manager, if it's your marketing manager, sales manager, what information do you need in order to be more successful? And it's amazing some of the ideas that come out. Sometimes you don't have all the answers, but at least you're building that collaborative relationships. So driver-based planning, you want to identify factors that drive company value and I will get into this in a moment, but this can differ by companies, by industries. What we're seeing now as companies are identifying factors that are non-financial assets. So we're really getting to what I think is really important, which is the customers and the employees. So how are we adding value to our customers, and how are we making our employees as productive as possible, which oftentimes means optimizing that employee experience. And then you need to establish relationships between the KPIs and value drivers. And as I mentioned before, you want to incentivize actions that impact performance measured. I think this is just a really good slide just because it really simplifies what we're trying to do. And then leveraging drivers that matter. You have your strategic objectives, right? You want that to align across the company. XYZ need to happen. If A, B, C happen, our progress will be derailed or accelerated. Again, so you need to identify, and then you have to constantly measure and validate these drivers that matter, and that's where the majority of your focus should be. How do we manage impacting these drivers, getting them to go in the right direction? As I mentioned earlier, they can be industry specific, they can be company specific, they can be company size specific, and they can also be a function of your risk tolerance. So companies, they have different ideas on the optimal number of drivers. So to me, I often hear that 3 to 5 drivers is best to focus on. My opinion on that is, in today we have all of this technology and data, so I would not necessarily limit that to 3 to 5. Now, 3 to 5 at the executive level, absolutely. But I think as you start to go down to departmental performance, I think there's probably 3 to 5 drivers at the departmental level that roll up right to those macro drivers. So I think we've talked about this in our last webinar on impacting decisions across the enterprise, in that there's relationships between the drivers of departmental success, and we need to understand those relationships to our macro drivers that really drive that company value. So I'm going to go ahead and ask my next polling question, asking you to share with me what you believe your company's understanding of the key drivers of your financial results are. Of course, I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions here today. Those of you who are interested in CTP or FP&A credits, you need to answer all of our polling questions. And of course, I would appreciate your questions in the questions area of the GoToWebinar control panel. You can ask those at any time throughout the webinar. So, and this is an area where I think a lot of times the inherent barrier is the technology. So one of my things that I often share is I think visibility is strategic gold. So the more visibility that we have across the enterprise, operations, sales, marketing, the more that we can see, the more that you can't manage what you can't see. So we start to see the drivers, and the right technology allows us to not only identify those drivers, but also validate those drivers. And those drivers could they could change, or the impact will change based on certain scenarios that we might see in the marketplace. So thank you very much, everyone, for answering the questions. Let's go ahead and close polling question. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the results. I am pleasantly surprised to see 21% of you think that have ideal. It's under constant analysis. I would encourage everyone to have this be in that category, but it's encouraging to see that 53% are in the good and ideal stage. So I think that is a little bit higher than I may have seen in past survey results. But regardless of where you're at, I think even if you may think it's ideal, I think there always is a room for continuous improvement, and especially those of you who are not in that 21%, so 79% of you, hopefully we are going to incent you to take actions after the webinar, to ask questions, look at technology, possibly identify some ways that we can facilitate a better understanding for you of those drivers of that company value. So thank you very much, everyone, for answering the polling question. So just want to kind of run through really quickly just how this would work in terms of driver-based planning. So you've got your KPIs, so value drivers. I've taken some I would think, probably innovative value drivers. So we're starting to look at quality of people, reputation of your brand, customer satisfaction, and this is results from a survey of executives. I have the hyperlink here. It is an interesting read. So you start to look at, your KPIs that impact. So we've got data quality, employee productivity, pipeline. So you start to map these relationships, and then you start to see, okay, how do I impact those KPIs? How do I incent those actions? And then how do the movements in those KPIs impact our value drivers? And then to make it a little bit closer to home, maybe. So let's take it down a level. So we're looking at scenario planning. We're looking at forecasting. What do we want to know, right? What's driving that top line revenue? So we take that down to the departmental level. On the sales level, I don't have all the sales KPIs, but I did my best. So length of sales cycle, lead to opportunity conversion, opportunity to win. So you look at all these KPIs, and then you start to say, okay, how do these relationships exist? Does it depend on the quality of our people, quality of our business process? So as we move business process technology, now we want to see what's the impact on our sales KPI. So I think this can be a beneficial slide just to get you in that thought process. So I think as this becomes a project, I would take this and do it for every key department. Make sure we're aligned on our top value drivers, and I would push this down to my departmental leaders, and say, okay, these are our value drivers. What are your KPIs? And then I'd come back and then as a CFO or CEO, I would have my list, my KPIs, and then I'd make sure that we're all in alignment on the same page, and then we would start to develop these relationships, see how we quantify them, and see how we get things moving in the right direction. So all of these great things that I've talked about, continuous planning, effective scenario analysis, this requires business partnering. So there's a lot of information, which is great, about business partnering. Few slides of information courtesy of the Business Partnering Institute and a personal friend of mine, Anders. So if you want more information on business partnering, we've done webinars on that. And then, of course, my friend Anders has some great content, and I'm sure most of you probably follow him on LinkedIn. So it's really about the mindset, right? And what I've kind of talked about before. So how, what, why? So how we want to drive business performance, value insights, build trusted relations, communicate with impact. All of this is kind of necessary for effective scenario planning, because we can create all these scenarios or not, but the key is how are we going to use the information from the scenarios? How is it going to make us more agile? So we have to have these as preconditions. And what do we want to do? We want to influence decisions, and why we want to optimize the business performance. So these are just kind of the hallmarks of business partnering. It's really becoming a science. So if you haven't looked into business partnering, I encourage you to do that. And then what's the path that we take to get from here, influence decisions? In my mind, that's what successful FP&A is all about. And then what does that lead to? Optimizing business performance. So you got to get that foundation in place. Team and operating model has to be a priority. And then you want to make sure you have that executive support as well. So before we delve into scenario analysis, just want to level set and ask you to share with me if your company currently leverages scenario analysis. Options, you're well established, you're in the process of doing it more often, you don't really do it, but you're considering, you have no plans, or you are not sure. Again, I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions here today. And I want to remind you that I can take your questions in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel at any time. So in order to be mindful of our time, I am going to go ahead and leave the polling question up for another few seconds, and then we'll go ahead and share the results, and then we'll really start to dive in scenario planning. I think it was extremely important to make the point that we need to have the proper environment, and this is how we enable it, set the stage for effective scenario planning. So let's go ahead and close the polling question. Let's take a quick peek at the results. So we have 21% of you are well established. which is maybe a little bit lower than I thought, but that's great. Hopefully, after the webinar is over, you will have that incentive to pursue scenario planning in a more robust manner. Look at the technology out there, connect with some of your FP&A colleagues who may be more versed and be doing scenario planning already. And so, of course, the takeaway for 19% of you that are not sure is that you should really ask that question. Doesn't matter if you're a treasury, finance, accounting leader. It's just something that I strongly believe improves the strategic decision making across the enterprise, and it's something in today's environment that we want to be sure that we do. Strategic anchors, right? So you lose your competitive advantage if you have it, and it also inhibits you from realizing some opportunities that are out there in the marketplace. So thank you very much for everyone for answering your questions. And I have my definition here, which I found, which I like. So scenario planning is essentially a thorough review of what-if situation with potential courses of action for each. So we want to come up with these what-if situations, and obviously what-if situations sometimes that matter, but sometimes what we do is we have to run some what-if situations through our model and then see if that's really drives things enough to incent us to take actions. And then you want to prepare for shifts in advance so you can prevent yourself, your company, from being caught at flat foot by sudden changes. So with the right collaboration, with the right people in the room, I think that really sets the stage for what types of scenarios that we want to look at, what are some of the assumptions that we might think impacts our drivers, and then also running things through our model, which, if it's flexible enough, which requires the right technology, and we'll talk about one of those leading technologies today. So let's dig in a little deeper. So you have to play effective defense and effective offense. So when you're looking at different levels of scenario planning, these are some areas that I would consider might impact your company value. So you have your counterparty risk, right? Your customers. Are there things going on in your top customers, things that could impact you negatively? Do you see things with your customers? Are you in danger? Is there a competitive landscape changes? And what about our suppliers? Suppliers counterparty risk. I guess this goes to counterparty risk, the price risk. So I would imagine that a bunch of companies have been scrambling to run different scenarios with the tariffs that are being put into place. I actually had a personal experience on the consumer side. So I was looking to redo the flooring in my house, and all of a sudden, boom, there was a price increase. So the dynamics there. Do I want to pass that along? What does that mean? How does that impact the market share? And then we might want to look at financial risk, right? And then a scenario may consist of moving, all of these factors in a certain direction, putting some sort of multiplier on there. So your financial risk, you might have FX risk, you might have you'd be exposed to currencies, you might have interest rate risk, you may have some debt that's variable out there, and so that could impact your company. And then, as I just mentioned, your commodity price risk. So what happens if the prices go up and down? What does that do to my margin structure? And what is it? What is that point at which I need to start taking action? So plan the action if the commodity price goes up by XYZ. These are the actions that we need to take. Of course, we have geopolitical risk into certain markets that we might be into, international markets. You have regulatory risk. And for the most part, in the current administration, I would say your regulatory risk is probably going downward. So that may be a time for you to play offense as those regulations may be loosening. We mentioned earlier the competitor dynamic. So what is going on in your markets? What is the barrier of entry? What happens if that barrier of entry goes down? What happens if there's consolidation in the market? What happens if a few of your competitors merge together? And then you have your industry and company specific risk. So when I was back in Treasury and Finance as a practitioner, one of the companies I worked for made submersible motors that go underground, help you get water if you're not on city water. So one of the risks to us was the weather. So the weather could be really wet, and that could impact us. So there were different things that were really specific to us. And then company-specific risk can depend on what your competitive advantage might be. So we may have had a patent on some technology in our control box. So what happens if that patent, we try to renew the patent and it doesn't happen? So you want to take a look at all these ways. So we don't want to spend too much time playing defense. However, these things we need to be ready to react for if we need to play defense. And the best case scenario is that we already have our blockers in line, right? When something happens. So it's the best case if we can say, okay, it's pointing towards this scenario happening. Now it's time to take an action. The action happens, and then we have all of our blockers in front, and so we have not left. Let's say our quarterback. We have not left our quarterback exposed to a blitz with no one blocking. And then for capitalizing on opportunities, and this is where I see. And then one of the things I'll mention here is that it's not necessarily that we want to be afraid of risk and volatility. It's just a matter of making educated decisions and having visibility into when that volatility takes place, or the probability of that volatility goes up. So you want to look at your competitor dynamics. So maybe there's things that are pointing in your right direction. Maybe your competitor is going out of business, and that would funnel an M&A opportunity. So what does that mean? What does that look like? Do you have new sales and distribution channels that you may be able to open? Maybe your marketing team has found those. Maybe that's a certainty. Maybe it's a probability. Maybe you're investing in that. And then your new products and services, your sales momentum there. You look at various scenarios and how successful those product launches are, those new services are, and all these things in some sense, of course, can be interrelated. And then we can have positive supplier dynamics. Maybe we've opened up new markets, and maybe we have a new low-cost supplier. There's opportunities to do things like supply chain financing, so we can have better relationships with our suppliers. And one of those things could be something around the fact that we are improving how we pay our suppliers, right? AP automation, right? We talk about that a lot. So those can be some extremely positive supplier dynamics and offer us more working capital to work with, and on the AR side, unlock that working capital as well. So we can have some positive supplier dynamics and working capital dynamics that we certainly want to make sure. So we have to, scenario planning, we're looking to play defense in some sense, but we want to make sure that we are absolutely ready to play offense. And sometimes it's great to have these people in the room. So sometimes you wouldn't think these opportunities exist, to play offense. So sometimes your mindset goes to defense, but sometimes the volatility, the right reaction can turn it into a competitive advantage and an offensive opportunity. I want to share 7 steps to scenario planning. I like these very much. So these are courtesy of Steve Player, and he obviously, you probably were very aware of his name, very instrumental. I'd say I was the founding father. He's one of the founding fathers of Beyond Budgeting North America. Steve has a lot of great thought leadership resources. I had the link down there, www.theplayergroup.com. So Steve has some great resources on how to move your company beyond budgeting, in addition to scenario planning and planning for uncertainty. So this would be an absolute takeaway slide for me that I would print. So first, you want to brainstorm potential scenarios, as I mentioned, offense and defense. And I think the critical part of that brainstorming session is that we want to make sure that we tap into the expertise that we have, right, across our company leaders. So it may be that you don't want everyone in the room at the same time. It might be that you want to have small group sessions and then take the results of those sessions and then bring that up to your C-suite. But I think it's important to get that knowledge, and those that are close to your markets, close to your suppliers, close to your customers, even those marketing people. So things that are going to drive your financial performance. Yeah, we might even want HR in the room, right? Because what's going to happen if we have this big spike? Do we have the talent that we need? So we want to have those leaders there. And then you want to identify what your company might need to do to address each of those situations. Do we have technology in place, people in place? And then it's good to begin with the extreme up and the extreme down. So the best case and worst case scenario. but it needs to be more than that. So, and this was, I think this is pretty common, is that even a few years ago, people thought scenario planning was base plan, best case and worst case, and that, okay, in the strictest definition, that is scenario planning, but that's not really what we're trying to get at here. Obviously, those are cases that we want to examine, but we also want to make sure that we are looking at obviously things in the middle that make sense, that impact our company value. You want to develop action plans for when certain conditions exist, certain indicators, and this is a great point that Steve makes here, but also makes whenever I've seen him present, is you really need to focus on tracking your leading indicators of the scenario occurring. So, for example, in my case, go back to my submersible motors case. So I want to look at, the weather. The weather is going to impact the demand. So that's a leading indicator of the demand for my product. So what are those leading indicators? Let's stop looking backwards and start looking forwards. Leading indicators, what do we have in the pipeline? What's the health of the pipeline? What are the conditions out there? We can regulatory, right? The regulations are going to go down, so that's so that may make our costs go down. That may open up markets to us. So we want to look at those leading indicators of scenario planning. Obviously, what we mean is this indicator means it makes sense for us to take those action plans. And then you want to identify the triggers. What is it that makes us go into action? And then the more information that you have, you want to refresh and expand your plans. So, as we start to look at this in more detail, and we look at the technology, again, what we see is there's often a barrier to technology. Is it's amazing what the right solution can really open up to your company. And so here's what I wanted to share from the FP&A Empowerment Survey that I was fortunate enough to be involved with Larissa Melnichuk and James Myers, is that we looked at over 300 companies, and we look at the ease of scenario analysis, only 10%, somewhat easy, only 1%, very easy. So my question to everyone would be, if you're not in this case, what opportunities would open up if this was very easy to you for your company? So how would it improve your ability to play offense, to play defense, improve decision making across the enterprise, impact that company value? So we want this to be very easy, and there's cost-effective technology that makes this very easy. So turn a bit to modeling, scenario planning, and technology. So many systems, such as Excel, in most cases are an on-site solution, and they deliver that hard-coded budgeting model. And then if scenario analysis really consists of what if we increase this or decrease that. However, as soon as the assumption and business conditions change, the model is pretty much broken, or it becomes irrelevant. And then even if you go in and try and reprogram your model, it's hard to compare the original, other than at the bottom line, or at the very bottom line, depending on what you're looking at, as the underlying financial logic is not consistent across the models. So you're really losing the expected impacts on the at the detail level in terms of the items of your balance sheet and your cash flow. And so when you have the right technology, what you can do is your financial intelligence is intact. So you have this, you're importing your financial logic, right, from your GL into your budgeting and planning system, and that's what really opens this up. So also, they allow you to consider things you didn't think of when you're building an initial model. So maybe you have a model hard-coded in Excel, and we didn't consider everything on offense and defense, and now there's a variable in there that we did not consider. So now we need to go back and reinvent the wheel. And then when we reinvent the wheel, we really don't have a good idea of the impact that that's going to have on things that we care about, right? Our balance sheet and our cash flows, because that's not really something that we're able to maintain as we start adding more variables into the model. And then in a robust scenario planning solution, it enforces the chart of accounts, and you can easily update the actuals as often as you like. So I know that was an inherent barrier to a lot of folks. And how do we update the thing? How do we update the actuals? How do we get the actuals in there? Make sure that we are using the most current information, and obviously that makes sense for the rolling forecast and continuous environment. And then you can change and add assumptions in bulk. You want to 10%, 5%, or you can do it line by line. And then you have full control and full flexibility over your scenarios and versions. And the other thing I failed to mention here is the ability to compare, right? To compare those different scenarios. And what's really cool, and what I'll show you in a few moments, is that you can actually look at all of the impacts in terms of cash flows, and even on the balance sheet. It gives you a specific screen where it says this is the impact that this actually expected impact that we might have. So let's take a quick tour through some screenshots here. And again, if you want more detail and a more customized presentation based on your company, we have the opportunity to request the opportunity for that. Again, we need to set the stage, right, to have continuous planning. So in terms of an FP&A system, you look for a solution that allows you to validate the drivers and dynamics, forecasting accuracy, and variance delivers. So what I like here in this leading solution is, look, we have the ability to dial in on our drivers, look at our drivers, expenses, revenue, and then on the wizard side we have the what if. So this is really a key functionality for this leading solution. So this allows you to go in, control your scenario, change what you want to change, and then the forecast allows, using these two tools in conjunction, you can do some really powerful analysis at a very low cost. And so let's just take a look at, we wish it was this easy, right, to create a new scenario. So go into the solution here, you look at balancing and version, so you want to set up that version there, and then it's just a straight drop down. You can create, note that you have your plan basis, so that's never going away, it's never getting changed, it's there. And then we have actual as well. So then we have, okay, so let's go in, let's take a look at, we want to change office rental. So related to office rentals, this could potentially impact our financial health. So what can we do? Okay, there's different things that we can look at. So different things that are driving on what the expense is based upon, and then the payment method. So we can go ahead and we can change, and we can look at the driver here. So we can look at that activity. We can look at manual, simple, and we can change that based upon. So that may give us some impact. But then we can also go in to the how it's spread. So what is the impact is it going to have if we spread it maybe evenly or quarterly or month end. So we have our drivers, but then we inherently can program in different ways to do those scenario analysis up front. So let's say you're wanting to invest in the solution up front. You can really look at what are the types of scenario analysis that we want to run, and then we can have that already ready to go from day one. So then we can change the other dynamic, which might be the payment method. Again, I talked about AP and AR. So we can change that payment method again. So it's really easy, just the drop down, and you have these various options that we have, the pre-programmed financial logic. And then this is one of my favorite screens. I'm sorry, it may be a little difficult to read, but you look at, okay, what is plan year, plan basis versus the alternative scenarios, and then you can see increase and decrease. So you can see the variance here. So changing something, not a huge significance here, but this is really incredibly powerful to be able to look at those scenarios line by line next to each other, or you can put the actuals in here. So plan basis, alternative scenario. So this really lets you take a look at things that are important to us. Maybe there's something, your cash, something's really important to you, right? Total cash from operations. So you're looking at doing acquisitions. So you can really play around with those variables. And of course, you want to be mindful when you do that, but you can really see the impacts of the scenarios and determine whether or not they are important. And then again, I want to point out just the ability to do dynamic analysis. So this just shows us how we go and we change the name that variable, and then we can do if we use the what if wizard, we can take a look at decreasing, increasing variables. So you can look at all these different areas, right? Company administration, finance, marketing, human resources, and then you can check which ones you like. So you can do bulk changes, 5-10%, whatever you might want to do, or you can take those on one by one. So it really empowers you to really do this in a very timely manner, and gives you the ability to run several scenarios, consider all the scenarios that impact the drivers of your company's success. And then in general, if you're looking for a solution that is going to offer scenario analysis, I would say you'd be looking at a cloud-based budgeting, planning, and forecasting solution that empowers this dynamic scenario analysis. Some of the key, this is a diagram that I love, and I would suggest printing this out again. So this is really, in my mind, kind of the nirvana of the continuous budgeting and planning environment. You have automated budgeting and planning, gives you precise cash flow projection. You can generate real-time performance indicators. It's efficient for your consolidation. And then we have scenario-based forecasting. So there's automation that goes into your forecasting as well. And then, so these are some of the features that I would look at. But I think this diagram kind of says it all. And here is, first and foremost, an extension of your general ledger, but also systems integrability is key as well. So just some final points to put ahead on everything. So you want to, the goal is driver-based and scenario planning success. And success in these areas means that this facilitates business agility, which means better decision-making, which impacts the bottom line. So you want to have executive support, and you need to have that strategic focus on agility. Hopefully agility is not a cultural issue. You want to be able to react. You may want to have a conversation about the dynamics. I think sometimes we underplay the dynamics to, especially the C-suite. We don't want them to get overly worried or focused. However, they need to be cognizant of all of the factors that can impact our results, and make sure that we're making educated decisions regarding actions or inactions that we might take based on events that happen, or based on those leading indicators we talked about. We want short planning cycles. We want the right technology, collaborative planning scenario model. We want buy-in, and we want collaboration with our business managers, company leaders. We want to facilitate fact-based decision-making, and we want to have that commitment to continuous improvement. And we talked about people, process, and technology. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our final polling question today. So I will go ahead and follow up with each of you after the webinar regarding any questions that we might have had. We had a lot of content to get through. So I want to once again thank our strategic partner today for our webinar today, Centage. And we would encourage you to go to the Centage website. They have a lot of great thought leadership resources relative to FP&A success. And I would also finally like to thank you, the audience, for your valuable time today. Again, if you have any questions regarding CTP or FP&A credit, or want more information on any of the topics that we have covered, send me an email to ernie@360thoughtleadership.com. Once again, thank you very much, everyone, for your valuable time today. Make the rest of your day great.